Becky?
It's 17 and 2 more will complete by August.
Is that 17?
And then 2 more will complete by August. So 19 by August.
Wow. 17. People getting this.
And then 2.
Okay, we should have the- Yep, we do.
It turns off after. It goes to 6.
Okay.
April. Or May, no, April 21st of the minutes, my last name.
What was the April regular?
That would be the 21st.
We don't have those minutes.
Oh,
in our
okay.
thing. It's the May, I think it's the 21st.
The 21st, correct.
Okay.
You ready? Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our May 19th, 2021 board meeting. Will everyone please rise to the pledge of flag? I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have roll call.
Acker,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Dr. Cadman, Mr. Fleming,
Here.
Mr. Medensky, Mrs. Pusateri, Mr. Robeson,
Here.
Mrs. Tierney,
Here.
Mrs. Pashawski,
Here.
7 present.
Dr. Mann, can we have our superintendent's report?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Pachowski. I'm very pleased to say that for the first time in many months, I will be having Dr. Vitale and Mr. Mirabelli presenting for me. So we're going to start with Dr. Vitale. Share the screen.
So over the last few months, we've really been trying to plan for what the school year is going to look like next year. So we worked on really gathering better data than what we had and using better numbers. So we started by doing an outreach to our families. First, we sent just a basic infographic with just some preliminary information of how we're doing as a school and how our schools look. In that infographic, we had invitations for our parents to attend an open question and answer session. And last week, our principals were kind enough to host kind of virtual Q&A sessions where families could log in and ask questions of our principals. And we had really, really good responses. After we had those Q&A sessions, we then sent out a survey. The survey offered 3 options. Option 1 was the Abington Heights in-person 5 days a week. Option 2 is the Abington Heights district-run virtual program with our faculty supporting instruction. And option 3 is the Abington Heights Common Academy with a third-party vendor. And we really fully described what those options would look like. We asked them specifically to choose if we had option 1 or 2, which they would choose. And then if we had option 1 or 3, which they would choose. So as of 7 o'clock this morning, we had 401 responses. So that's just kind of breaking it up of how our students responded. We currently obviously have 610 students virtual, so we're missing about 200 responses, but we still feel that 400 is a nice sample size to get an idea for planning. As of the responses, 37 students out of the 610 that are virtual would want to stay in an Abington Heights virtual program, and 12 students would want a third-party vendor. So when we talk about option 1 versus option 2, this is what we would anticipate. So if we ran our own program, we would have 12 students in elementary, 12 students in middle school, and 13 students in high school. That would be the breakup. So it's about an even split of where those students virtual would be. We're saying out of the 400 responses that we received, 355 students are returning. 37 are going to stay virtual and 9 are undecided. And what they said is they're either waiting to make a decision to see where we are in August, they are choosing homeschool, or they just said other without offering more information. So these are the students that are returning. So like, this is to me the most exciting number, is that we really have a high number of students that are returning from the virtual setting from this year to next year. When we look at option 1 versus option 3,
Can you go back to that slide so we can just take a quick? Thank
Please.
you. Thank you.
absolutely. So when we look at option 1 versus option 3, which is a third-party vendor, we see, and I just want to remind you that only 12 students would choose the third-party vendor out of the 37 that would choose an Abington Heights run program. And it would be 1 elementary student, 5 middle school, and 6 high school students. That's how it would be broken up in choosing that third-party vendor. And that's just the same information, just represented differently, because we all like charts and graphs. So this is what it would look like. Out of the 401 responses that we received, 378 students would be returning in person. So we had 37 that wanted the virtual Abington Heights model. We're getting a lot of those back if we don't offer that. They're coming back. 12 are remaining virtual, and 11 are still either undecided, choosing homeschooling, or other. So that increased by 2. So that was 9 in option 2. It's now 11. So basically we could have 2 students leaving
This
our
is,
program.
just to be clear, this is what happens if you don't offer option 2, correct?
Correct. This is if we have in-person or a third-party vendor. So these are the students that would be returning to in-person, should we offer option 1 or 3. Yes,
Did any of them say we will just go to cyber?
none of them specifically said it. We did ask for open-ended responses, and some of them just said other without specifically saying. So if we're looking at the third-party vendor versus the Abington Heights, blue would be an Abington Heights program and red would be the third-party vendor. So we would have more students virtual if we went with an Abington Heights program, less if we went with a third-party vendor. So the why, which to us was really the most important reason for the survey, is to understand where our families are at.
Just for clarification, so that third option, the reason why the lower number, does that mean that more people that are virtual would go back in school, or does it just mean that they're undecided?
So we have, out of the 37 that were going to be virtual, right? 12 stayed virtual, going from our program to a third-party virtual. 2 more said, we're not really sure. And the rest said, we're going to come back.
So that's an interesting choice.
They want our teachers and our programming.
If it's.
And we also, and I'm going to get to this in a minute, but we also explained that if we are running our own virtual program, we will not be able to offer the amount of electives and courses that we're currently offering. So like at the high school, we couldn't offer, we would be hiring lots of teachers. So we can't offer every level of 9th grade English, every level of 10th grade English, and so on, because it just wouldn't be possible to staff.
And the survey takers knew that?
Yes, and that was all described. So if you looked at the survey, it was all described of what option 1 would look like and how you're scheduling, what option 2 would be, any limitations of option 2, and then option 3 as well.
So were the surveys given to parents separately, or did the parents and students combine their response?
We sent it out via Remind. Some students filled it out themselves, some parents filled it out themselves, and I went through and kind of did any of the difference of opinions,
So this is,
but there weren't many.
how many surveys were returned?
401 as of 7 o'clock
So
this morning.
400 out of how many families?
610 virtual families. 610 virtual students.
So do you expect more surveys may come in?
We sent it out middle of to late last week. We sent it out again on Monday. We can send again to try to get those other 200 students, but I don't know how many more will respond.
So of the 200 that didn't respond, the assumption, what's your assumption?
I mean, statistical probability is that it would follow a similar
Right,
trend.
yeah.
So
So I
we
would
have
say
a
that-
fairly good sampling size. So I mean, we
Right.
have a good percentage. We have over 60% of them returning.
Right.
Okay, so the why, which was really important to us to kind of understand where our families are. So why they want to return in person. So most of them feel that it's low risk. And when they talk, and this was a narrative. So this was not that they had choices. I did a very open-ended question and they were able to write their responses. So this is really trying to kind of paraphrase what all of our families said. So they said that they feel that it's a low risk, and that was the biggest response, was that the district has responded appropriately to COVID, that it's a clean environment, decreased spread, and people are now vaccinated. And because of that, they are safe, they feel it's safe to come back in school. The other big one is that they felt that it's a better learning environment for their students and to be with their peers. And then the scheduling opportunities. So the middle and high school students said that there were better scheduling opportunities to be in than to be virtual. And then there was a small percentage that said they want to get back to normalcy and have a fresh start for the next school year. Now, why the students are remaining virtual. And to me, this is a big deal. Most of the students that are remaining virtual are saying it because they don't want their children to wear masks. So that's a huge percentage of those students that are going to remain virtual.
But then you just say if we don't need it in the fall, or that's not even an option? I mean, because I think that's an option.
It's definitely something up for discussion.
Yeah.
The other family said that it worked well this year, that it worked well and they're just going to keep it going. Some families said they're waiting to know more, which we certainly understand. Some families said that there is no vaccine for the current age group. And then other families felt that there should be a vaccine mandate, that as a school district, we should mandate that you have to have a vaccine to be in the school. Cyber charter, and I know we want to know more information about cyber charter. So I created a survey and I mailed it to families. We do not have email addresses of our cyber charter families. So we had to mail it out and get it back. So as of this morning, we had 9 back, which is not a big enough sampling size when we sent out 163 surveys. So we sent a survey out, and the last question of the survey is, what can we do as a district to get you back into our district? And I think that that will give us lots of information. So we're awaiting those responses, and then I will gather all that data, and June 2nd, I will present about the cyber charter.
Can I just go back to that slide that's right before this one, before that one? So if I'm reading this correct, so of the 37 students that said they want to stay virtual, well over half of them, it's not because of concerns about COVID, it's about concerns about masks, which is
Correct.
the
It was
opposite
about
side.
68 to 70% that if we did not have a mask mandate, they would return. And they were very clear with that.
So out of those 37 students, you get a significant
20 some
portion
back.
that's gonna come back.
Correct.
That is interesting.
Yeah, so that's,
Does that kind of support a little bit the fact that the third party virtual option is something they really don't want because their reluctance to come back is just the mask,
Yes.
Yeah, I would say that that's
Yes.
where-
you know?
That's what I would.
And you had two families that shared that there are serious medical concerns with their child. But that was just a small percentage. So that I didn't include that, but beyond that, it really was the mask mandate. So we'll get more information on our cyber charter families and where they stand and what they're anticipating for next year, as well as what we could possibly do to earn them back as our student. So now it's the decision. So we have three choices. All in-person instruction, Abington Heights Run program. In order to do that, we could hire up to 10 additional staff members. We would need 6 elementary, 1 for each grade, because of course, the 12 students that want to be virtual are not all in the same grade. We wouldn't need a 4th, because right now there's nobody in 4th that wants to be virtual. And then we would need 4 new secondary teachers to teach English and math. That way we could offer that for our students. Obviously, there's a long-term cost to the district and a limited ability to schedule courses for the students that are virtual. So we know that not every student is going to get their leveled course that they would get if they were in person. The third option is the third-party vendor. The cost is $3,000 per elementary student and $2,500 per secondary student. We would have the ability to reevaluate it at the end of next school year. So if we hired all of these teachers, they would be permanent Abington Heights teachers. Whereas if we went with a third-party vendor, we could reevaluate and decide whether we're moving forward with them or not. And then there is a large course catalog. So there's over 300 different courses that students could choose from. And they're allowed to take 6 courses at a time. And once they pass the course, they can take more with no end in sight. So they can take as many courses as they want. So the potential cost would be $36,500. So there's a success coach that the one vendor that we're looking at offers. And basically a success coach is $6,000, and it's almost like a school counselor just for that. Just for our Abington Heights students that are working in the virtual model. We don't have to do that. We can do that internally, but that's an option. So that's included in that. But it would be $3,000 for the one elementary student. And then it would be about $30,000 for the 11 secondary students. So that would be the potential cost of the third-party vendor.
And would seniors graduate, are there seniors that would do this?
Yes,
And would they graduate with Abington degree?
yes,
Would they?
it would be an Abington Heights diploma because they would be our students.
To fill all of our requirements?
Yes. So my recommendation, if I am allowed to have one, is that I believe we should move forward with a third-party vendor to support our students who wish to remain virtual. We would offer more courses to the students than we could offer if we ran our own program. We have spent a lot of time looking at third-party vendors, and there's one and only one that I have found that offers live classes and a live tutoring in all content areas. So you go to the live class if you want. If you don't have to, which is unsettling, but it is. And then if you're having trouble, you can just hop into a Zoom and there's a math teacher in that room from 8 to 5 who can help you with your work. So if you're not able to attend the live session, there's still that live tutoring. The curriculum is designed for virtual. So the way they design the activities, they've designed it for the virtual model. The cost is much less than it would be to hire teachers. And if we were to go with our own program, staffing would be really difficult because we could potentially have 2 students in kindergarten virtual. And now we're paying 1 teacher to have 2 students. And what if those 2 students decide to come back? And then what does that look like? So staffing would be really difficult to plan for if we went with the other model. Okay, discussion.
What kind of testing does the third-party vendor offer? You know, so our students go through that. How do we compare where they are versus our in-class students?
So the third-party vendor would be willing to use our bench, like our universal screeners that we use at the elementary level. They would be willing to use those. And also they would be using the same standardized assessments that we use at PSSAs and Keystones.
Okay.
So we would be able to compare how those students are performing versus how our students in person are performing.
I have a question. Dr. Catali, what criteria were you looking for to find this third party?
So we spent a lot of time talking to different vendors. And this one vendor that met with specifically had the most FaceTime with students. And that to me was the most important, was that students had somebody that was available to them so that they could touch base with them and that live classes were offered. Because there are some third-party vendors that everything is asynchronous, that students just log on, they have a syllabus, they go through the activities and they never talk to anybody. And that was not comfortable for me as an educator. So we were looking for the vendor that offered a lot of courses, but then offered also that face-to-face instruction for our students.
What happens when the student decides to come back? Is that a year contract with them for that student?
So it goes by semester. This vendor goes by semester and it goes by seats. So we would say we have 12 students that are virtual, we would purchase 12 seats. Those seats are not transferable. So let's say we had one student who wanted to return and one student that wanted to go virtual, we would have to buy a 13th. So it's not transferable in that capacity. However, we would have to sit down as an administrative team and discuss what transition looks like. Because the students in the third-party vendor would not be receiving our curriculum. So they would not be receiving, let's say at the elementary level, wit and wisdom. So we would want to make sure that we're coming back at a nice time for students to transition back in an appropriate manner. And that would be all things that, depending on what the board decides, that we would start to work out.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
It seems to me that as soon as the mask mandates dropped, this is almost going to be a non-issue, right?
Hopefully.
Just have a question. If we go back with your recommendation and we're in person with everyone else, are we still going to have the ability, like we did this past year, to stay virtual for a day for whatever reason? Will all the students in the school district still have that same capability?
Where we were going to do like the FID days.
Is our first, we will be better at instruction and able to do those types of things. The question will be, will our funding streams allow us to do it? Because under the current situation, we have, the superintendent has a certain emergency authority to close down school and have virtual days, and it doesn't affect our funding. So we will have the internal capability to do it. We're going to maintain that. But there are some underlying questions that have not yet, I don't think, fully been answered.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, to follow on to that, I mean, I would think you have to have that ability to do it, because if there is an outbreak of some sort in
Right.
a school,
Yeah.
the right thing to do is to close that school
Correct.
until setting aside what the law says.
Oh, we would never stay open. The question would
Yeah.
be, would we close as if it were a blizzard? As opposed
Snow
to
day.
getting credit for the days.
Okay.
But all the students, we went through an awful lot to get everybody able to be virtual in the last year, right? So that would continue with,
Oh, yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
we would
And
still
it was-
have everyone have that capability.
Long before the pandemic, we were working on Google Classrooms and trying to increase our capability. So we were well, our teachers were well prepared for this. Not fully prepared, obviously, but well prepared. And this last year, so long as we can have teachers teaching kids in person and not online simultaneously, if they all have to go home for whatever the reason, then it's not a giant ask for them to say, let's just teach our kids from home this day or this week.
Well, speaking of snow days, we're going to look at the calendar this year. Are you going to build in snow days where there's no education, or are we going to Zoom?
Well, I got in trouble on that the last year. So in the calendar, I have a few snow days put in there. Just in case,
So
right?
snow days with a day off.
Like as in a day off snow day.
Oh, okay.
But we'll talk about that as it goes.
That's a non-answer, by the
We
way.
I thought
broke
snow
80
days were
today,
off.
Mrs. Tierney. We broke 80, so let's,
Cross that bridge.
yeah.
So Dr. Vitale,
Yes.
so in your recommendation, I'm assuming that includes the coach. The role and responsibilities for the coach, I'm assuming, would be, navigating the application, helping the students navigate. If there's breakout rooms, they can navigate when they come back, like a facilitator.
Absolutely.
And
that
also
coach-
content manager.
Correct. So,
Right.
so that coach is a school counselor for all intents and purposes. So they help them with the navigation side, they help them with the academic side as well.
Yep.
So they help with content and then kind of like the tech side to and it's an accountability stance as
And
well.
I think that is very useful for the price. I know you said it's optional, but I would recommend that if we do this, that's in there, because that saves a lot of effectiveness and efficiency around, a group of students struggling if something's down or they can't get to a document or there's a locking, mechanism. And also I have to say this, I always do, the security of the application. Is
Absolutely.
it secure?
So, I mean, it is a widely used program. I did not look into the cybersecurity aspect of it.
Okay, you just may want to look and
Sure.
just check, because school districts are very soft targets for things like this.
Absolutely. I will certainly look into that. Thank you.
Have you
Sure.
benchmarked at all with any other customers of this third party?
So I've spoken to several of my colleagues, and they are moving from one vendor to this vendor. So they're moving away from other vendors and going to this vendor for reasons that I spoke about of kind of in-person time.
And the one point that I think is very important to make is that this is the option for third-party vendor that we dislike the least. Okay, right. And that's a very important, we are not endorsing this. Never would we endorse something like this, but we're saying that of the vendors that do this, this is a very good one.
So
Are there
Dr. Vitale, how
KPIs
many,
that-
how many students did you say, how many surveys to the cyber charter students? How many are there?
We sent out 163, and as of right now, we have 9 back.
So I'm assuming one of the questions is if we offer these programs, so that's the other part of the equation we haven't heard. So
Correct.
We know of 37 that might take this program, but if we don't have masks, that might be way less.
Right.
But what we don't know is
The cyber
the
charter.
cyber charters, will they choose this program over the cyber?
Right.
or-
That is in the survey. We're just waiting to get them back.
Right, and that's a big unknown.
Absolutely.
Have you gotten as far as understanding like what is success, what is failure, like, establishing metrics or KPIs, expectations, anything like that?
As for the
with the
third-party
third
vendor,
party, Right.
we have not gotten that far of expectations. We were kind of looking for direction from the board, and then we would
Right.
set of what our expectations are for students. But in talking with them, they did say, because we expressed that attendance for us is a big concern, and we want to make sure, and that they can add those metric systems into their grading system to make sure that students are accountable for their learning.
Yeah, that was a good survey.
And I want to thank the principals, Dr. Vitale, for not only their surveying, but for reaching out to families, having those Zoom meetings. There were some remarkably fantastic conversations in reaching out. So again, the efforts to engage are endorsed, so thank you for this. And we're in a far better place than we began talking about this a month and a half ago when we were talking about 500 kids.
Right,
So
exactly.
this is really headed in the right direction, as I think circumstances in the community and
Right.
regarding COVID is headed in the right
Yep.
direction. So thank you, Dr. Vitale. I think Mr. Mirabelli.
Just one last thing, because I've been critical about the survey designs and all that, but this was very good. I mean, the
you.
design was very good, and a true measure of that, I think, is the response. I mean, getting over 60% for, you're almost at the population, basically. So everything's statistically accurate. And it was ironic because when we looked at the group of people that for the mask, it kind of fell into that distribution. So, but that's the power of a good survey, because people will respond.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so that's a very challenging act to follow. I just wonder, does anyone have a charts and graphs limit that they can see in one? So I'll try to move it along, because this is my second formal budget presentation to the board. And frankly, we have been talking about budget really continually at every board meeting in one form or another. I remember we were at the high school, Dr. Mann dusting off our Forecast 5 software to show some comparisons and different things to other districts. So Really quickly, let's breeze through what we've talked about recently. And the main point we are very good at driving home is that we're an efficient spending district, right? So we are lower spending than our peers, than the state average, than those that are local and near us. And really, by state measures, we are a low spending district. But also there's compelling evidence that we are a very high achieving district, right? So spending efficiently. And how do we spend so efficiently? Is we generate savings through a variety of measures. The status quo is just not something that's ever been acceptable for us. We, refinance debt whenever possible. We look for energy savings measures. We're really tough negotiators. We procure energy and any other supplies and things. We're very hard on the procurement. But really, the thing that does the most and has had the most impact is savings through attrition of professional staff and support staff through outsourcing. Those are the two things that have had the biggest impact over time. And we'll talk about how we're at a bit of an inflection point at this time. So more on that in a minute. Taxes, through the hard work of the board, administration, and staff in these measures, the district has been able to match revenues with expenses over time, only raising taxes 4 times in the last 15 years. If you count, so it'd be 3 times in 14 years, however you would like to do it. When you go back to,
So small, you forgot.
yeah, they're never up to the index. There was a 1 mil, there was a 1%. There's, yeah.
Louise, you
So-
weren't at that meeting. That's why we got.
Yeah. So I'll double check my count, but I'm pretty confident it was at
I don't remember being 4. I thought it was more like.
over 15 years. So it was 115, 117, 119, 121. That's where we're at.
121?
And then we're at 122. I have this. Staffing levels, we've heard in recent meetings, there's a desire to increase instructional staffing to meet the needs of our students in light of the pandemic. And we've also heard that facilities, there's a desire to evaluate our facilities for potential improvements. So just reviewing what we've discussed. Tonight's discussion, I want to sort of do a where we've been, where we are, and where we're going type of a theme. And then we'll talk about the major drivers in the 21-22 preliminary budget. The full budget's in your folder. And then we'll just talk briefly about the capital projects fund and how that might help us going forward. So end of year projections. This is always something that's a little bit tricky, and this is a very tricky year to be trying to judge variances because they're all over the board with the COVID impact and additional expenses in some places and savings in others. But we did have better than expected revenue collections. The pandemic related medical claims suppression is a very real thing we found, and some very good news there. Skyrocketing charter school costs and additional costs, including COVID supplies and equipment and additional staffing, were really factoring into this analysis. And you had to use stimulus funds to cover the COVID-19 related costs. So there's some good news there. So what does that look like on the revenue side? If you recall, back in June of 2020, in the throes of uncertainty and high unemployment spiking, many were speculating a recession was on the way. With all the unemployment, we thought our earned income taxes would drop. And we've watched it every single month, and it really never went down. So for those local revenues, have just on the local side, the real estate earned income and real estate transfer, which the real estate market is red hot, have given us a $1.6 million revenue surplus over budget, right? So that helped eat into the budgeted deficit that we have. On the state side, not as good of news. We were flat funded at the beginning of the year by the state, and we're expecting about a $70,000 negative variance there. On the federal side, I presented this slide before. This is every stimulus related grant that we have received or are slated to receive. I will note that generally speaking, the grants in black print will be utilized before June 30th of this year because they line up very neatly and cleanly with all of the additional COVID PPE, sanitizing, additional staff, Chromebooks that we purchased, things of that nature. So those amounts line up very neatly with the total expenditures identified for COVID. The other thing I want to say is a FEMA funding. Great thanks to Karen Dewar in my office. We started this application before Thanksgiving, and we finally got approval to submit it through the first level. We've had a weekly call with FEMA. This has been the most extraordinarily challenging grant I've ever applied for. But the good news is we've submitted for a little over 100,000 in expenditures that were eligible, and they generally reimburse at about a 75% rate. So any dollars we get from FEMA will help us out, and I think it was effort well spent. So thanks to the team in the business office for working through all of this. So a little bit of a timeline on how we propose to use these grant funds. They are all one-time funds. We propose, since some of the expenditures being proposed are operational costs, we propose to sort of stretch them out. So ESSER 2, you'll see the top one in red, is about 650,000 if you break it into 2 years. And that is as long as you're able to do so. ESSER 3, also known as I believe it was the American Reinvestment Act or something of that nature. ESSER 3, we're calling it, just to keep it simple, is about $2.3 million. You split that into about $780,000 over a 3-year period of time, just to sort of smooth the impact of the operational costs here. So that's sort of how we propose to roll out the funding. On the expense side, I'm going to just point to 2 things, and I'm going to call it the charter school crisis, because it very much is that, right? We talked about the pension crisis when we were going up 4 percentage points, right? And 2 percentage points and what that meant. But we're talking about a real crisis here. Here's charter and cyber charter enrollment. And this is the full picture from March, when the pandemic first hit and where enrollment was all the way to the left. And then what immediately happened in September of this year when kids came back to school. And then as the pandemic sort of raged on, and there we are today, we've plateaued month by month, maintaining basically the same number of cyber charter students there. What does that look like in terms of funding? This is a stat you've heard me say quite a few times. $2 million is what we project to spend. So to put that in context, the red bar is our projection for this year, but over time, just since last year, we have doubled or increased our expenditure by 100% in 1 year's time, from 1 to 2 million. And since 2008, we have increased the expenditure by 800%. And if that is not crisis level, I'm not sure what is, but to put it in a matter of perspective, 30% of the basic education subsidy that the state sends us is redirected to charter schools. Right. And a reemerging thing that I keep hearing in the community is, well, they're free. What's it matter? Don't send them there. It's your choice, not our choice, gets redirected. And if we don't pay them directly, it comes right out of the subsidy. We have no choice in the matter. It's not free. It's the exact opposite of that. It's extraordinarily expensive. $11,000 for a regular ed student, $21,000 for a special education student to go to a cyber charter school. So
Combined cyber and brick and mortar?
yes, and I have a breakdown here for you as well at the various schools. So this should look familiar. Dr. Mahan presented this slide, and what we did was added the current enrollment and the enrollment as of March 2020. So just right at the beginning of the pandemic there, by school. You can see the rank of each school, what we estimate to spend at each of the schools, the cyber charters, and the current enrollment at each. So CCA or Commonwealth is by far our largest cyber. Anybody have any questions on that?
So these are just the cyber.
Just the cyber.
And then you're gonna see how many are.
Where's my graph here? Oh, okay, so the green at the top of these bars and the purple, that's regular ed and special ed students at Howard Gardner, right? So that's approximately 25 students in April of 21.
So that's the only brick and mortar charter we send students to is Howard Gardner.
Once in a while, we'll get a fell, but I think right now we're at Howard Gardner.
So the majority of our charter is cyber.
Overwhelmingly.
Okay, so that's the concern. So even pre-pandemic, our cyber charter has been increasing. Is that an accurate pre-pandemic?
Oh, yes, that's accurate.
It just keeps. In lieu of us, and all that money is going to continue to go out to the cyber charter. And that's the concern that I have. I mean, I totally agree with your analysis and your recommendation with respect to the impact of COVID. But this right here is my concern. The trend is, how do we deal with this trend? Short of legislation that hopefully will
Well,
pass.
and the problem we face is, we are better at teaching math, better at teaching
Yeah.
English, better at graduating kids, not as good at making slick commercials, billboards, and radio ads.
Right,
And if people look at the commercials, as they do to sign up, that's our problem.
right,
If they were to look at the information that we provide, as
right.
far as the massive evidence of complete failure of cyber ed, then they wouldn't be making these decisions, but, that's a challenge for us. And they only need to get 10% of our kids.
Right,
We need to retain all of them. And
right.
that's why we need help from the legislature.
So the short-term solution is doing exactly what you say. Long-term, either school districts come together, develop their own cyber school where you all collectively contribute and send your, I don't know what the answer is, whether it's us doing, but this is a big problem. I would, if more were going to brick and mortar, it would be a little different, but the fact that they're 75% are cyber.
A little higher than that.
Or more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's 25 out of, what did we say? 25 out of 160.
Wow. Wow.
We, to be fair, though, we don't have a lot of brick and mortar options in this area. Right.
No, I'm saying we have a problem with cyber.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think until legislation makes a change, this is a choice that's offered, it's not gonna go away.
Well, I know, but so that I'm just saying, so what can we do? Can we do our own program?
Continue to
You
be
have-
competitive,
you have
continue to be competitive.
You have to assume that those families or students that choose cyber even before COVID do that because there's something about the educational process at Abington Heights they really do not like.
Well, that's what we have to
So,
get to the bottom.
so the question is, what is that? And does our third party option, for example,
And maybe it would. Maybe the third
meet some
party-
of those things, and maybe
Right.
we can switch them from that
Right.
to that by offering more of
And
a
maybe
Abington
we could,
Heights.
Right.
One of the things,
Inclusion.
I'm going after the cyber charter, but when you look at their results, they're catastrophic. Right? One of the things that some people find attractive is a lack of rigor.
Well-
And that's just true.
And if that's the case, yeah.
And that's a hard area for us to fight them on.
Right.
Uh,
Okay.
Do we do any kind of exit interview with families who decide to pull out?
I speak with them, and there's a whole variety of issues that go on. Some people just find it easier. As far
Yeah,
as
but which you-
flexibility, or I have a job, or I play in this particular game or activity. And again, some people say, look, this is what I want to do. I will help teach my kid, and here's a platform that helps. There's many different reasons.
Yeah.
But
Some things you're never going to be able to
very,
win.
very few will say, I will learn to read in cyber
Yeah.
charter better than in my first grade.
Right.
Is
class.
this replacing homeschooling to some extent?
No, it isn't, because my office deals with all the homeschooling. they're not very big. The true homeschooling crowd, right, who are dedicated and working at home and see this as the best way. We allow them to take whatever classes they want here, you know, we engage with them all the time. They're committed to their own model. They do get resources that help them, but it's a different group from my experience.
But prior to this year, we added, if you wanted a cyber option, your only option was to go to the Commonwealth Connect.
Right. And
Now, if Abington is gonna offer, whether it's the third-party vendor or its own, now there's another option, and that's,
But at the end of the day, you may have a group of families or students that you simply aren't going to come back.
I mean, Jim, for your budget discussion, though, you are budgeting for the reality that this is an expense and that it's straight line, in your opinion? Or are you budgeting for more?
I'm not budgeting for $2 million, no. I think we pulled back to maybe $1.5 million, something like that. It might be wishful thinking, but you know, you have to kind of look at the trend there. It's not at 2 million, but I think a lot of people got exposed to cyber charter schools and they may be there as a matter of circumstance. They may find out it's not what it, is advertised to be. My guess is as good as anyone's. We could throw darts at the wall as to who's going to come back, but I have no idea.
But in terms of the budget for next year, is there a line item for this?
Yes, so I believe I have $1.5 million in there, and it could go up, right? We'll have surveys coming back, and what we do, part of a lot of what we'll be doing between the preliminary budget, which be adopted tonight, in final, is that we go through these line items, we look at ratios, we look at percentage, we look at trends. And not that we haven't already been doing it, but more data becomes available in the month of June. And, this survey will be a critical thing we'll be looking at as far as, do we revise that $1.5 million in a positive or negative way?
This may be a question for Dr. Vitale, but so when a student is at the cyber charter, they're taking assessments and so on presented by the cyber charter. And of course, the cyber charter is going to provide assessments that in general give them good results. That's how they can justify. My question is there some way that we can look at the assessments of that student versus the assessments within our school, or do those families see that? Because if the family is in cyber charter and they think their students getting straight A's, but I'm talking about the individual families even.
Well, they would get their PSSA results back. They would get their Keystone results back. They would get their SATs back.
Okay.
Now, it's hard to know exactly. We assume they would get, that they should from that school. And now they don't know what they would be, had they gone down to hindsight, they wouldn't really know how much higher it would be, but it would be higher.
Well,
Take it sure.
This is a great billboard right here. Just put this on a billboard.
That's the problem.
right.
And I'm just gonna add one thing. We just had elections last night, right? For the last however many months, our community, with 11 people wanting to participate in this discourse about our public schools. Right? This board has had 3,000 people watching your meetings and participating, as you know better than anybody, long into the evening, right? Anyone who wants to come down to this office, come in and wave a finger and say, I don't like the way things are going. And they do that to you all the time, right? And they say good things too. We're accountable here to our community. And when they send us money, they know where it goes. Try finding, if you could,
That's right.
who's running the cyber charters.
Right.
And if you do find them, you find it's a management company that's in some cases sponsored by a hedge fund that has nothing but a profit motive. And so it's yet another example of why this has to change. It's wrong what's happening. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's.
couldn't have said it any better for
Anyone
certain.
who said anything bad about it, you're right, right? Because it's so blatantly obvious of an abuse, it must change. Again, I'm not talking about brick and mortar places. I'm talking about the cyber charter schools that they exist. They're so low, they can't get a rating.
Staggering. So we have this huge $1 million problem with the charter schools this year, or $2 million problem, but we have some one-time good news, and that is a concept called medical claim suppression due to COVID. And what we're seeing, since we're self-insured, when we have a bad year, well, we endure the bad year, but when we have a good year and low claims, we enjoy those savings. But this is very much a one-time phenomenon. People putting off, optional procedures and things like that. And people aren't going to the emergency room as much, as you can see, down about 50% off normal rates in New York City. I'm not sure what the localized statistic is here, but what that means for us is, we won't know for sure until probably August as to what the final number means to us, but it means that somewhere between $750,000 and $1 million less will be spent on those types of claims, which means that we don't have to pay the premiums fully to ourselves, which means we will just simply stop paying ourselves to our insurance fund. So we will be able to claw back some of the damage that the charters are doing one time, right? The charters are not going away, but the claims will return and perhaps be way worse next year because of all of the things that they didn't have addressed, right? Or maybe conditions got worse. I hate to speculate, but if things aren't getting done and they still need to be done, I think they'll get done at some point. But temporary good news, one-time savings somewhere in that order of magnitude, according to my analysis and our consultant's analysis, would be somewhere in that ballpark. Okay. Now on to the 21-22 preliminary budget. And again, this is my second presentation on it, so I'm not going to belabor the points, but I'm going to make some high-level comments. The preliminary budget is presented without a tax increase. The current tax rate is 122.91. The last time we increased taxes was 2018, and that was by 1%. The Act 1 index, which the board already voted in January to stay within and below, is 3.5%. If by chance the board elected to raise taxes, always a stat I like to give is 1 mil is worth about 220,000 in revenue. And this is just something that has to be noted. We had a negligible millage appreciation in 21-22. And a lot of that comes from, we're building houses, right? And there's houses going up. And a lot of that comes from the top down. I think many of our top 10 taxpayers have filed appeals or knocked their property down. And we're seeing a lot of appeals that are sort of a really quick race to the bottom. So our biggest taxpayers are seeing some decreases or fighting for those decreases. And partly because of the common level ratio that we've spoke about many times here, which is very high, and obviously an countywide assessment is well overdue. But this is of concern because some of the larger properties are receiving credits going forward. So we not only will receive less tax, we'll receive no tax until we work off the credit that they're due, right? Because some of these appeals go backwards in time. Yes.
Lawsuit that the county's doing with the assessments?
I don't. I haven't heard anything additional.
It is still proceeding. I think there was just a hearing that sounded, from what I can interpret, really good for the people who are pushing for an assessment. It's very clear to anyone who's looking for that has to be done. So I think it's a matter of time.
Thank you.
Before it happens.
That comes sooner.
Yeah.
So that's something that has to really be on our radar as we prepare our budgets going forward. Revenue assumptions, just so to be fully transparent, what's in there. Real estate tax collection rate, we have historically used 93.5%, which is a pretty accurate and slightly conservative tax collection rate. We did drop it down a little over a point last year because we didn't think everyone was going to be able to pay their taxes. Well, lo and behold, It was right on the mark historically. So we're back at our historical tax collection rate. State subsidies, we're expecting them to be flat, but even at a best case scenario, if Governor Wolf got everything he was asking for, I think we'd get something like $250,000 additional, which, doesn't even begin to address, the pension increase alone, the charter increase alone, the salary increase that we'll be paying alone. So not much help from the state. And as I already noted, we'll be assuming half of the ESSER 2 funds and a third of the ESSER 3 funds in the coming budget.
Are we limited on what we can spend the ESSER funds on?
We are, it is relatively, I'll say relatively flexible. So,
So if you wanted to put a roof on a building,
that's a tougher sell. I would have to really study the regulations and
turf field
do
would be
those.
out of question.
I know of some districts that have found some creative ways to make that work. Though that would probably keep me up at night, but
We've been, in some of the meetings I've attended, we've been cautioned about roofs specifically.
What does the legislation say you can spend the money on?
so I'm focused in on what I call the line 15, which is the most flexible use of funds. It's in a lot of it deals with to maintain your operation. So theoretically, what it means is you can spend it on existing salary and benefits if you can justify it in a certain way. But then you have to justify revenue loss. And there's a whole case to be made. But what they really want you to do is address learning gaps. In fact, 20% of the funds must be dedicated to address learning gaps. How are you going to do that? And so that would be, staffing, testing, these types of things. And the best advice we got is PASBO, is the association I belong to. They say, if you really want to do it, the way the government wants you to do it, get staff, not stuff. Right. So that's the easiest way to report. The procurement with the federal government is an absolute nightmare. If you want to buy anything over $250,000, you need a team of lawyers to make sure you're okay. So that's not the best explanation, but it's an expedient one.
So if 20% of those funds must be ticketed towards gaps in education, then you have to have a countervailing expense in the budget to address the gaps, I assume. That would be something we don't have right now.
Well, I'll tell you what we propose to have in the budget, and I think that will answer your question. And I think
Jim,
that's
what's the pension contribution at right now?
let's see.
Are we at 30%?
Oh, it's 30, almost, it's 30, it's gonna be 34.6, something like,
And are they, is there an increase coming?
yes.
It's gonna go higher than 30?
It'll get as high as 38 now.
Oh,
They don't perform,
How
the investments don't perform, they underperform the market.
I
Yes,
did read what they
yes,
did, which is
yes.
why I'm asking. We're
Yeah.
at 38?
That's a couple years off,
I mean,
but
we
yeah,
will be at 38.
that's one, yeah.
unbelievable.
They haven't certified 38, but we'll be
So we're over 34.
30,
I think
34.6.
when we first got on the board, I think we were at like 2 or percent of the salary.
Well, I can always remember, like, Mike and I would have discussions, we have to get to
I
the
know,
plateau, we
you
have to get to the, well, they're making the
I
mountain
know.
higher.
So just to make sure we all understand that, for every dollar of salary we pay, we have to pay 34 cents, an additional 34 cents to the state for the
That,
teachers.
absolutely correct.
That's right, yeah.
38, coming up to 38.
Yeah, that's like
38, but
maybe
right now.
3 years off, but
Just to make sure we all know.
yeah,
Yeah, so a teacher earning 50 is more,
it's
Seven.
$100,000 to for
right,
a
and then you
teacher.
have to write the benefits and the, yeah.
So
So you wonder where all that revenue that a rich district has goes.
What is our percentage of benefits and salaries for our?
well, if you hire somebody at 55,000, all in gross is about just under $100,000.
No, she means a percentage of our total budget.
Total budget.
That's
Oh,
like
it's
1/7.
76%. I have a slide for that as well. That's what's proposed in 21, 22. It would be a higher percentage, but the cyber charters are taking a bigger chunk out of the budget, right? So those are the revenue assumptions. What is in, I think this gets to your question, Mr. Acker, what is in the 21-22 preliminary budget above and beyond the status quo? That would be, and this is not talking about cyber or, a cyber program or anything. This is 8 new teaching positions, 1 new elementary principal, and the replacement of 9 teachers who are either retiring or resigning. So that's what's in your 21-22 budget that sits in your folder as proposed right now.
Mr. Mirabelli, so I remember we were talking about a social worker and a nurse. Were those part of this budget just now? Or?
So I'm aggregating this into teaching or professional staff positions. I think.
Let me help because that is not his area, right? So we have in this budget 2 high school teachers. 1 is English, 1 is math. We're very excited about the prospect of math and our computer science program. We have the principal position, and then we have 2 guidance counselors going to the elementary. That's 2, 4. What is the other one? Reading. Reading teacher.
Two reading specialists
Right.
and 2 intervention teachers at the elementary level focused on math intervention.
We are coming back, and this will empower us as we move forward. This is something that we should do for the students.
And with the focus of being, we have to catch these students up.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right.
we have to identify where they're at and then.
That's right. And we have to build not only academically, but also socially and
Right.
emotionally. We have to
Right.
lift people up. And this is, I think, a very good investment for the board.
And it's a good use of that money.
So of those 8 teaching positions, 4 are going to be in elementary.
Correct.
Half.
Right, 2
That's
counselors,
excellent.
2, no, it's more than that, is it?
So it's 2 reading specialists, 2 intervention teachers, 1 counselor, because 1 is going to the middle school.
Right.
So it's 5 at the elementary, 1 at the middle school for a school counselor, and then 2 teachers at the high school.
Very good. Thank you.
So normally this slide would say 9 teachers retiring, and then we would pick a number less than that to replace, right? So this is sort of like earth shaking for me to present. So it's quite a deviation from budget presentations I've made in the past.
And let me point out, we did not put in a nurse, right? A very good case can be made for an additional nurse at the elementary level. It was a very close call. We did not put it in, but it's certainly worth considering.
How many nurses do we have and what's the coverage?
We do not have a nurse per building at elementary. We have 2 nurses who do 4 buildings. And then we have some outside work with our non-publics. We have a full-time nurse at the middle school and a full-time nurse at the high school. We have nurses aides. Hard to get. We've had some good ones come in, but then we've lost them pretty quickly too. But we do not have a nurse per building.
I'd like to, I don't know if we're going to talk about it or not, but I'd certainly like to see that happen. I think that it's something that we should have
That's,
in the elementary school buildings.
if that's the case, I mean, this is a preliminary budget, right? It's a discussion. That's something that we should do.
Well, so you're saying that the aides can cover a building, the nurse's aide can cover an elementary building?
Well, that's what we do, actually. We have, like, for instance, if the South Abington, if the nurse is in South Abington and there's no nurse at Waverly, we have a nurse's aide at Waverly. And the nurse's aide may not necessarily have the credentials. Essentially, it's more like watching the room and making sure things are okay, calling the nurse if there's a problem, dealing with kids who have bumps and scrapes. But, as far as the diabetic, medically fragile children, that kind of thing, we cannot rely on nurses' aides to provide those services.
So it's like a scope of practice, so only certain people can do certain things, and rightfully so. Do you think we're covered the way we're arranged now with the assistant of aides?
Well, I mean, we're physically covered, as in we have people, but actually we've spent months without aides, right? Where the principals are running around trying to fill a spot, and they're essentially acting as the school nurse. So at times, if we're at full steam, right, we don't have coverage everywhere. Another nurse would be good, but as we looked at this in balance, this is a lot. This is a lot, and a nurse would be helpful. I don't think a single principal would disagree at all about an extra nurse.
Are the aides through the Kelly temp service?
I think some are, and maybe some are our own. I think there's a mix there. I think they're mostly our own, but they don't receive benefits. It's an hourly salary in the support staff contract, so it's a very, very different level of compensation from our nurses.
What's the turnover for a nurse? Do they,
Our nurses, we're fortunate. We have great nurses who stay a long time. The turnover of nurses' aides has been extreme. Extreme.
What have we missed by not having a nurse a full-time nurse at each elementary?
Well, it is a lack of, our nurses' offices are crowded, right? And our nurses are torn running from building to building, and it's a matter of triaging and providing medical services, but ultimately there are issues of emergency, or students who are at risk, students who have feeding tubes, students who have diabetes, and so we're really running. And when we have a nurse who's out for whatever the reason, we really are scrambling to provide services to the kids who need them.
So it's a liability issue as well.
Well, I don't view it that, it's just a matter of it's a service issue. It's a service issue. I wouldn't term it as a liability issue, but a service issue and a capacity issue for our kids.
I recall going through this many times.
Right.
We've always, this question has often been raised, and we've seen all kinds of presentations on the number of students per nurse, I believe, and we were always well within those guidelines.
We are within the guidelines. That is
And,
correct.
I don't recall you ever before saying, we really need to get another nurse.
Well, heading into the pandemic, I did say that for sure. Right. I was unequivocally clear that we needed a nurse to going into the
Well, in the
pandemic.
pandemic, yeah.
That we did, right?
And
And so again, I did not put it in, right? But and I said, it's a close call.
Right.
It is a very close call. And so a very excellent case can be made for the nurse. I did not put it in, but I will not deny for a second, it's a 49-51 split here in just my very strict view of trying to get this. But compared to our peers, we are understaffed with respect to nursing, clearly, right? And as we have kids who are medically fragile, who need treatments, it's a good thing to have school nurses, for sure.
So how many aides do we have at any given time, or what's our desired number of aides?
Well, we would like an aide per school, a nurse's aide per school.
So we have one nurse, one aide per the high school, one nurse, one aide in the middle school.
And then for elementary, we've not been able to retain them, but we like to see if there's a nurse in one building, the aide would be in the other. And then if there's and vice versa for the four buildings, knowing that our nurses are also out doing the non-publics, service to non-publics as well.
And so we have a hard time putting an aide in each building at the elementary.
Oh, we've gone months and months without having aides, and it puts, they have to close the nurse's office. The teachers have had to keep kids in class who we might like to have down in the nurse's office. It's a challenge.
Is it fair to say that the other school districts are fully staffed at the elementary school
Oh,
level?
I think so. I don't know, yes, Mr. Track.
So if you added, excuse me, added one nurse, how would you schedule that? So you'd
I
have,
think they would
you'd have
rotate.
3 nurses for the elementary.
Mhm.
I mean, my question is, would you add 4 as opposed to 3?
No, I think I'd be good with 3, and it would be a matter of rotation and scheduling. And it would just be a more capacity in the buildings. And when, for example, a nurse is out for the day, or if there is, say, a crisis that absolutely requires the nurse's attention with a single student, then, we would have some capacity to help out in those circumstances. Does any of the principals want to offer a thought on the value or need for nurses? And they're not going to exaggerate. They will tell you. Some of the challenges you faced maybe this last year.
Well, at Clark Summit Elementary, we have a lot of medical graduate students. It's very busy health office. And so we have, a student that's assigned there, and she alternates with the woman that offsets her schedule is an RN who works as a nurse assistant. So it has been quite a challenge. We did have another individual this year, which is definitely.
Yes, come on up. That's what you get. Right.
I was just going to say that this year has been a challenge, of course, in a busy medical room with, many student needs especially speaking of Clark Summit Elementary. But we do have, with the addition, we do have a long-term sub nurse this year. So that really has helped tremendously with offsetting the challenges that we see with the kids. It's a busy medical room at Clark Summit Elementary. I currently share one certified school nurse, and then we have an RN that works offset her schedule. She works as a nurse assistant. So we always have to have somebody 100% of the time at Clark Summit Elementary due to the medical needs of the students. Where we do have longer durations this year at Waverly. I can speak to those two schools. And so it has been helpful to have another nurse this year. Thank you.
Well, could that be an option to have another long-term sub nurse?
Long-term subs over time really have to be for vacancy. Really, this is an extra job. It's not a.
Okay.
Can we add it in and see where it falls off?
That's the board.
So we actually have some data, which we probably shouldn't pull it up live, but Forecast 5 does have a staffing ratio by category, which it could be nurses, and then we can do some rankings and comparisons.
How about let's see what they say. I'll send it out. And you take a look at it.
Yeah,
And then,
that'd be great.
vote on it as it is tonight, and then
Right.
we need to make an adjustment.
So
Yeah,
just so I have it clear, so currently, without adding somebody else, how many nurses do we have in the elementary schools? 2, or we have 3 right now?
No, we have 4 nurses.
No, not the middle school and the high school. I just mean the elementary school.
Oh, the elementary, we have 2.
You have 2 now. Okay.
But plus that
Plus the
long-term
long-term
sub
sub.
nurse.
Right, which
Plus-
is not a lot, it's not a. Right, and
Plus
nurses-
8,
We have
plus
aides,
nurses 8.
we have aides who have no benefits who are paid at
Correct.
the support staff rate. We currently have a long-term sub, but that's not something that we'll be able to.
So in the budget for the coming year, is that long-term sub position continuing in the budget? It's not. So your budget for next year is for 2
Correct.
nurses. So I mean, I would,
Plus 8.
what's that? I'm sorry,
So-
plus 8.
So our nurses are also doing non-public work? How many hours a day are they out?
They have an obligation for all of our non-public, the height, the weight, the vision screening.
Oh, so that's not all the time.
No, it's not all the time, but it's something that regularly has them out of buildings. And then they'll try, for instance, a lady of peace. The doctor come in to help out with the student or manage care issue. We try to provide as much service as we can, recognizing our staff is short, and try to keep it to the statutory.
So then they don't even have a nurse at all?
That's.
Or, no, so is that why our nurses have to go?
We have a statutory obligation to do basic nursing services at those buildings, and we try to keep it to the basics. We do try to pitch in wherever we can when they have a special circumstance, but they are out. So in Christian, I think the number of different schools that are jurisdiction require some nursing.
I think there are 4
Four
schools.
schools.
Yeah. Some of them don't even take services based on the health report that we file, but most do screenings and things like that. So we'll give you some more analysis on the nurse and what other districts do, and sort of where we rank. But those are the new expenditures in the budget. Just to put some figures on what's in the budget. a 3% raise per the CBA on the collective bargaining agreement. For existing professional staff, this doesn't count the new proposed staff is approximately $500,000. You would put, that's fixed cost included, I believe. And then the cost of 8 additional teachers is about $800,000. So that is about $100,000 a teacher. It comes in slightly under, but if they get hired on a different column or whatnot, so 100,000 is a good round number we like to use there. The approximate difference between the 9 retiring teachers and 9 new hires is the good news that we have to work with here. That's about $250,000 to use, to fund these other raises and initiatives. And the cost of the additional principal generally will be around $150,000, depending on whatever salary. That's a whole salary and benefit package. But the salary is undetermined at this time, so that's just a rough estimate.
Does your 500,000 for the raise include the horizontal movement?
It does not. Nor does it include the attrition.
Well, you have that down there, the difference between the 9 retiring and the 9 new hires. You've got that.
Right, but the 500,000 is exclusive of that attritional number, so it's not like 750 reduced to 500. So that's just a pure, here's what the 3% will cost to move downward.
Yeah.
So, but it does not include the column movement.
Okay.
But the budget includes column movement, as we know where it's at, okay?
Yep.
I'm sorry, I was unclear there, Louise, I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
Here is sort of a familiar view of how I like to present the budget, but I'm doing it a little bit differently this way. What we would normally look at, as we do on our board report, is we take the prior year actual, the current year budget, and then we look at the next year's budget. Well, when you compare budget to budget, I mean, that's 2 educated guesses that really don't mean anything, right? I mean, they mean something, but we've gotten almost 10 months of data now to say, what does 2021 really look like? So what I did was I adjusted all of the expense line items to what I believe and forecast them to be. So the 21 projected column, that second column there, is not the budget as we passed back in June of last year. It's what I forecast them to be, right? So, and then so you have a little more actualized data to say, well, the salaries at the top go up by $800,000, which is a 4% change, which is a pretty good deal when you talk about all the staff that was added. But that's also a factor on how high the salary were in the current year. When you talk about the extra long-term subs and things of that nature, right? So if you looked at the budget, it would be a little bit different variance, but actual to budget next year, 4% change on the salary. The benefits, though, just the opposite, right? We talked about the COVID claims suppression and clawing back between $750,000 and $1 million. So that 14.5 is not the budgeted number. It's about $800,000 less than the budgeted number. So that's why you have a 9% variance there, right? So trying to get you some more actualized data so that you can maybe ask some probing questions as to why things may be the way they are. And as you move on down, the variances swing a little higher, but they're smaller amounts. So on smaller dollars. So the percentages look a little higher than they may be. But the major drivers, charter schools, additional staff, salary increases on existing staff, virtual learning, and additional field trips we put in the budget as well as a tool to entice students to come back. So here is what that savings looks like. And we've talked about this 100 times recently. And this is the professional staff, specifically teachers, the teacher headcount, FTEs. Over time, and you can see that consistent decrease, right? But the orange line is the student to teacher ratio. So you can see that going up. I think from memory, I think it was just below 15, and now it's just below 16. So up a full point in the ratio there. So we see our student to teacher ratio increasing. And I think this graph we may have seen before, but I think it sums it up the best, and just how earth shaking this and what an inflection point this is in the fiscal history of Abington Heights. So we see the blue line, that's our staffing decrease or increase over time, right? So you see the staff going down over time with a slight uptick in 2020 versus the enrollment increase or decrease over time. And you see we start to keep it relatively consistent on a downward plane, but then the lines diverge in different directions. So I believe working numbers, if the laser isn't working, the proposal would bring us somewhere back around here. So this line would bring us almost up to net zero with those 8 additional positions. But so those cuts, everyone was warranted, everyone was made at the time, but there becomes a point where you can cut no longer. And also, unless you're going to sacrifice programs, which is not, my area of expertise, but that's the fact of the matter. You cut further, or when services are required, additional services are required, things will suffer there as well. So
the orange lines are
enrollment increase or decrease over time. So it's a cumulative percent increase.
Okay.
So you see, some years it goes up 3%. I think there's a 5% increase in there. While our staff, our teaching staff, this is depicting here, has, significantly declined there. So most of our work is done on the expense side of the equation, not the revenue side of the equation. And this proposal represents, really a total change in of the course of what we've been doing. So instead of giving you 10 graphs on how to explain the 2021 budget, I'm gonna have to get up a little closer, or maybe I can't. Small. Up in the top right, I think we had the question about what is our, I'm sorry, the middle left would be the proposed budget expenses by category. You can see in the blue and in the orange, that's salary and benefits. And if you add those two together, that's 76%. The big takeaway at the bottom here is that you can see that the blue revenue and the red expense are relatively flat and even with each other every year. That's the board managing their expenses and revenues to make them basically break even every year. So that's really where you want to be, small surplus or break even, not running a deficit every year. And the green line is your fund balance, which has pretty much stayed at about $10 million over that time span there. Taking a look at the expense sort of stacked column chart there, it's called expenses by object. In the blue, again, is your salary. In the orange is your benefits. The green is purchased services. And in the red, we have other. You see the red got a little bit smaller there in 2019, 2020, because we paid off a bond. We still have some debt remaining there. But you can see where those things, how the trend has looked. Now, the cool thing about this Forecast 5 software is that we can forecast forward based on assumptions we can make in a very neat, tidy, clean, and easy to manipulate way. So this is what the finances would look like if you took the preliminary budget as it stands today, did not raise taxes going forward, but assumed a $500,000 appreciation in your mill, and paid similar increases to what you're paying right now to staff, and forecasting that all forward. So the budget we're presenting tonight is in a deficit position. It's about $2 million with a $150,000 contingency. So you have about a $1.8 million deficit in the proposed budget right now before you add or take away anything and make any changes. And if if that was an actual number and all of these assumptions were true, the green line on the bottom graph is your fund balance, and you would see by 5 years' time, you would be in a pretty significant negative fund balance position over this. Now, there are a number of things you can do. There's revenue enhancements. You can also work on the expense side again and kind of work the same routine that we did over the last 15 years. But just a word of caution that it's, again, hard to see, but if you look at the top here, these green slivers, that's federal stimulus money. And that is taking up 4% of our budget for this year right here. It's never been greater than 1% in recent history. Those funds will go away. They won't be here anymore. And they're not recurring revenue. So that's a word of caution that we are increasing our operational expense without a way to pay for it later on down the road. All else equal and status quo. Okay. So that's a lot on a couple of slides. I do plan on just putting this out on the web so that people can kind of look at it. It's a lot cleaner when you're at your desktop looking at it than in the PowerPoint. Then my final slide is our capital reserve balance. If you look at your board report that's in front of you today, you'll see almost $3.5 million in that balance. The couple of projects that we're just finishing up have about $100,000 left to be paid on them. And the one project that is in the pipeline that we thought we would be doing this summer, but we talked about last meeting, the South Abington roof, for a number of reasons, including pricing and labor availability. We delayed that project another year, but that roughly is coming in at about 800,000. So if those, again, if that is actually the figure, no contributions are able to be made, your capital reserve balance will be about $2.5 million.
Don't we still have to do a roof at the high school?
That's another project on the horizon. It's just that the South Abington is, sort of next on the list based on condition.
So we have a roof, the remainder of the roof at South Abington, and then a roof at the high school.
Yes, I don't know exactly the full lifespan of the high school yet, but I know we're not too far off.
Okay.
Are we going to, this is restricted funds, correct?
This is for capital reserve only. Yeah,
Right.
you can't transfer
Are
it
we going
back.
to transfer, are we going to designate, transfer and increase our capital reserve?
So I think I should have been more clear in the beginning. So my initial projection, did I lose? Okay, so here I say, current forecast see the district breaking even or running a small surplus. That's our projection. So
Right.
the notion of any surplus going to the capital reserve fund is on the table.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what we've done, as long as I've been here. I think as long as Dr. Rayan's been here.
But there's restricted and designated, is that the term? What's the term?
Oh, so that in particular, that's your cash balance for your capital projects fund. So that's not your general fund balance that's restricted.
Right,
Yeah.
Right.
So you have $10 million in your general fund,
Correct.
give or take. And that won't grow because if we do have a surplus, it'll go to the capital projects fund. If, we follow past patterns.
Right. But
That's
I'm
right.
just wondering, do we need to put more in our capital reserve fund based on what we have? Can't we?
Not something I would recommend because it becomes more restricted, and it's particularly when you're in an environment of increasing operational costs. And quite frankly, when you have a larger balance in your checking account, you tend to get a better interest rate on it. So we've been pretty successful in getting above market rates on CDs and the money market. My recommendation would be sort of stay the course with it.
Okay,
In a pinch, we could do a general fund transfer.
okay,
We have 10 million is more than we need.
right,
Like, we would never see an emergency of $10 million.
okay.
Now, I say that it's very, very unlikely.
I just know that we're really looking at facilities right now. And
Yeah, and you do have a portion of the general fund balance assigned for
Right.
capital projects and also for future increases in employee benefits.
Right.
So, so they're assigned or designated, the
Right.
terms have changed, so forgive me.
Right.
But yeah, so there's some resources there, but with big projects, they do tend to go quickly.
Okay.
I just had a question. So once you move the funds into the capital reserve, they're restricted for capital.
Yeah, it's not a two-way street.
Right. So they go in, that's gotta be for capital, but you can spend at any time. You don't have to put funds into that to spend it on capital, correct? From the general fund?
Correct, but you would be wise to do so, because if you say spent it out of a general fund maintenance line item, that drives up your cost, which then drives up the tuition rate for the charter schools, because the
Correct.
charter schools are
So you want to
based
move
on
it
our
in.
costs, so.
You might
we-
do it the day before, but you want to move it in.
So, yeah, so we, very rightly so, we do what's called a transfer out to another governmental fund. And, that, it's not offshore accounting, it's just how it needs to be done.
Correct.
So.
Labor market.
Yeah.
Offshore being old Ford, right?
No comment. So,
Okay.
I mean, that's my presentation. I hope that helps, give you a sense of what's in the budget. The rest is really, status quo as far as like positions and things that we'll use in there. Here we go, next steps. So really what you're doing is saying, we're going to procedurally agree that we're going to move ahead with the preliminary budget, and we'll prepare for the final budget passage. Now, there's chance for deliberation now, chance for deliberation at the work session in June. And, if there are changes, we'll make them.
And just a question, is our meeting after June
Oh, my
16th?
goodness.
Don't we?
I do apologize. That should be the 23rd, right?
Never the fourth Wednesday.
My apologies. So I guess if that's the only bad number on my slideshow, I guess I can live with it, but
Okay. Well, he's-
23rd? Okay. 23rd.
Just so if it goes out to the public, they know the right.
Yeah, I'll switch that before it gets posted. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. So that was the superintendent's report. Wow. All right. Okay, so can I have a motion to approve the agenda, right?
State champions in the mock trial team, congratulations. Also, the
What's that?
what's our national rank?
Well, there were two different scoring methods. We were 24th out of 48 teams in one scoring method, but we were in the top 5 in total points scored.
Congratulations.
Wow.
Avoid having to talk about it. Once we have the Lackawanna agreement with Lackawanna College on our agenda for tonight. It doesn't matter how many people are getting associate's degree this year.
I believe the number is 16.
6.
Oh, that's wow.
Right?
Earn their degrees by the end of August.
Wow.
60. And that's great for those kids. So many more. Well, they don't have the degree. They have 20 or 25 credits that they're using. Our experiences that these are really transferable credits. Our kids are coming out saying they work. So what a great thing.
Yeah.
that we only have 16, 17 kids with high school diploma and an associate degree with highly transferable credits.
Wow.
Really good. That concludes my
That
report.
concludes.
Finally.
Okay.
finally, yeah.
All right, we have a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved. Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson,
Yes,
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes,
Mrs. Poszalski.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
Can I have a motion to approve the minutes from our April 21st board meeting?
So moved.
second,
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mr. Robson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski?
Yes.
Motion carries. I'm sorry, it's 6-0.
And do we have any board reports?
The facilities meeting, we did not actually have an opportunity to meet, but with the help of Mr. Acker and myself, we kind of put our thoughts together a little bit and to give you a little bit of an outline of some of the, from that 2017 report that we had with the district. And Dr. May and Mr. Mirabelli, please add anything if our numbers aren't accurate. But we thought it would be nice to just get a kind of overlook of the things that we must do, should do, and would like to do. The focus is really on buildings, roof, lighting, and safety. The must-dos are the roof that you mentioned, the South Abington roof and the high school. And if you see, you know, the pricing is all down there on the switch gear at the high school. We haven't done that yet, right?
We've made good progress on that.
Okay.
And there are some very much open-ended questions about exactly how to proceed. So we have made progress. There is still more to do,
Okay.
but we have made some progress.
Okay. And how about the foundation work at the middle school?
That's very much an unknown.
Okay. And redirecting the sewer lines that we had that conversation a couple of weeks ago. Is there any new information on that? And
I think our attorney and the General Services Administration are going back and forth,
okay.
trying to come to some resolution.
Okay. Lighting switch to LED at all the schools. Have we done that?
Lots of it.
Well,
Lots of
LED,
it.
yeah.
We've done lots of it.
Yeah.
There may still be more to do, but I think we've done.
Yeah, we've really been active on it, particularly in the summer months. So
I think that's pretty well covered. I think.
And
Do
our
we know
own
the
staff-
savings on that? On the LED?
Well, we go project by project and we take the project cost and we usually pursue it if it's less than a 3-year payback period.
Okay.
So I don't have the savings numbers, but that's the analysis we go through. And, you know, if it's on the cost, we'll see, you know, for example, LED bulbs are very expensive, but they last a lot longer. So there's an inherent savings there. So 3 years is sort of our general rule of thumb to, you know, pursue.
Was that bid out? The lighting, was that a bid project?
I'm not
Was it
sure.
competitively bid?
Oh, is that bid? So we don't tend to take on huge building-wide projects. If we did, we would do it. But usually we'll do, for example, a gymnasium, and that's something that really is under the quote threshold of $20,000, and we'll get multiple quotes to do it. And so is that what you're referring to, or like we haven't just said?
Basically, the labor's done in school, in district personnel.
Sometimes electricians, depending on if it's a simple bulb change out or just ballast or something, we can do it if
But
labor's
the
available.
fixtures, the lighting, was that competitively bid? The
It's
bulbs.
competitively quoted. I make a distinction between bidding and quoting, but yes, and
Okay.
also there are state contract pricing. We generally don't end up pursuing that because, you know, it's higher than what we can negotiate or quote through others.
Okay.
But there's definitely a competitive process. We'll reach out to multiple electricians. We'll reach out to PP&L to see what subsidies are available through the, I forget the name of the program they have, but in certain months, it becomes more and more generous, and we'll pursue it. It happens to be in the summertime a lot of the time.
Thank you.
And an area that Mr. Robeson quite often inquires about is security with our hardware. Are we partially completed? Is that underway or?
I think we may have some, the large project, as far as our external doors and our card swiping, is largely completed and certainly paid for.
Oh, good. And would like to do the high school, the labs at the high school, right? We have that on our list to look at. Have we done any work in the labs?
No, that was just,
I'm not sure I have enough information to respond.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, and flooring. district-wide? Where are we? Have we done any replacing of flooring? Do we need any?
We do some like
Okay.
tile and placements. I don't know that that's a top priority.
Okay,
And to the extent that we have areas that need to be, for instance, downstairs, we just did one.
Yeah, it was the tile falling
The
apart.
tile was falling apart, so we did some
So-
downstairs.
Yeah.
it's
So
ongoing.
I don't think there's anything pressing, but as we go along and we see needs, we'll address them, but I don't think it's a large ticket.
And the one area that I was thinking of too is our technology. Where are we? Are we increasing our band? And
We
are we
spent-
everything up to where we think we believe we need it?
Yeah, we heading into the pandemic and then accelerating rapidly at the onset of the pandemic. We invested a very significant amount of money in our infrastructure. And I think that now our recurring operational costs with respect to Chromebooks has changed and increased. But as far as infrastructure, I don't foresee any need for,
Oh, good.
because that's been done. We've done a lot through the e-grants. And Mr. Suma has done a very nice job managing that, but those investments have been made.
Do you think there's anything that we've missed that is mandatory that we have to work on this summer?
No.
Good.
No, not at all.
Okay. Anybody have any questions on any of these?
I just think, going back to our discussions about defeasing the bond and so on, we talked about what we may need coming up. And I think clearly looking at the 2017, we've made a lot of progress, but we still have several areas where we have requirements.
So instead, I think what you're saying is that we were discussing the possibility of using $3 million to defease the bonds. Does it make sense to use the 3 million on any of these projects that are?
Well, if you're asking me, I would say you need operational revenue. And I would be much happier to say, don't defease the bond if you add $700,000 of operational revenue to the budget, which you're going to need over time, which means raise taxes. So because there's no free, if we don't spend it for something and we know that we're running deficits, the idea of defeasing the bond frees up operational revenue to spend. And while these projects, again, many of these projects I don't think are going to hit the actual price that we have on this sheet.
Right.
But to the extent that you can have 2.5 million in the capital reserve right now, you may be adding a little bit to that at the end of this year. And you have $10 million in a general fund. I think there is some flexibility to allow the bond to be defeased because it stands alone from an arbitrage point of view as a good idea, right? And the problem that you're facing, as you see from the presentation, is if we're not raising taxes this year, we're going to be giving raises, we're going to be increasing operational costs, things get more expensive, pension is going up. And if this year we come in with the balance just a little bit, we finish in the black, but not by much, what happens, right? How long are the value of the federal dollars is that it allows us some time to increase our revenues to meet the expenses that we're facing. But absent defeasing the bond, you need to accelerate that effort to increase the operational cost. And so I'm not tied one way or the other to what has to be done, but I think that standalone, it's a good idea to defease the bond because the interest rate, it will be a small savings. And what you'll do as far as to pay for the running of the place, you don't have enough operational revenue and you can get some, convert it from fund balance or capital reserve from a bond from debt into an operational expense. So I still see great value in defeasing the bond to the extent that it's not done, then it does raise a question of what do we do to increase the operational revenue.
Well, Mike, I mean, theoretically, money is fungible, right? So if you have $3 million sitting in a pot, whether you take it, pay off the bonds, and that gives you that money each year, or you take that $3 million and take a little bit out every year to cover some of your loss and deplete that 3 million. It really, other than the slight savings and interest that you're talking about.
Well, I
Right.
mean, because, here's what I would say is, as far as depleting that money, you're spending fund balance
Right.
which is a one-time operational expense.
Or you're spending it to defease a bond. which is a-
However, you free up that yearly, instead of having a bond payment, which is part of the operation,
Mhm.
you now have money to put into,
Which you
reduce.
will have when that bond is retired anyway.
and,
And whether you spend it a little at a time, okay, you know what?
I was asked.
No, I know.
So,
I know,
and so
but-
what I'm saying, if we wait until a certain amount of time, right? Are we then going to be increasing the operational revenue to the extent we can so that we don't hit a cliff and we don't look back 3 years from now and say, wow, right? We had some time and we didn't use it wisely.
Okay.
That's the only thing that I'm saying.
And to some extent, by increasing our number of teachers and doing those things that we really know we need to do, that's increasing the expense in the budget. So
Yes.
to some extent, you're saying that defeasing this creates the revenue that covers some of that cost.
It does. That is exactly
That's
what I'm
really your
saying.
point.
And I will say, Mr. Azar made this point, and I totally agree with it, right? The real value is the difference in arbitrage, which is small, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But the actual allocation of recurring revenue to recurring expenses, I think alleviates immediate needs or mitigates immediate need to raise local revenue.
Yeah, so I just jump in. So if you defease the bond today and you use the general fund balance to do that,
Right.
correct? That's what you do, right?
Yes.
So if you do that today, you're going to use general fund money
Correct.
to do that. Potentially, if you don't defease the bond, you might not have to touch that general fund money because the budget is what it is. It's a guess, right?
Right.
So you may run a surplus that's enough that it pays for that amortization in those next 3 years, and the general fund balance is still at $10 million.
But do you foresee us?
But I don't know. No, I'm just saying that you don't, or we could be in a deficit. So you
Well,
don't, there's variables there that you don't control. And to me, it'd be great if we run a surplus and we don't have to deplete the general fund balance for that, but it is, to me, it's a wash, whether it's this, if that debt was long-term debt, then I would say definitely don't defease it, but it's not attractive. I mean, it's attractive, but it's maturing in 3 years anyway. So whether we defease it now or we don't, that doesn't really matter.
We've always said, match operational revenue
Mhm.
to operational expense.
Yep.
And to the extent that we defease a bond to free up operational
Oh,
revenue,
it'd be definitely easier for the next 3 years to do
that has
that.
been what we have been doing, right?
Definitely.
Now, if we decide we're going to arbitrarily spend down general fund money,
Mhm.
right, without recognizing it as a debt payment,
Correct.
right, that has to have operational, like as we have debt, we have to have revenue to meet the debt.
I mean, it absolutely indirectly, if you want to have more money, go and I'm just learning the past practices, right? If past practices have been that you have put surplus money into the capital, the capital reserve fund. If you defease the debt today,
Right.
you're going to deplete that general fund, right? Today.
Right.
To 7. But in the next 3 years, it's more likely we're going to have a surplus that we can put into the capital fund budget. So we could have a better capital fund position.
But where does that surplus come from in light of the projections that we saw now?
No, I'm just saying that I'm saying if the projections are what they are, if you use general fund money to pay down the bond,
Right.
you're going to have $600,000 a year of extra cash flow
Right.
that arguably, if all the numbers are what they are, that money is either going to solve your shortfall problem or it's going to go into the capital fund budget.
Correct.
Ultimately, when you get down, as you massage the numbers in the budget, I think we may be faced with saying, okay, we need that savings. I think my concern on all of this, however, is that we do have some significant capital costs coming up, and I think there's some building pressure within the community of doing things to improve the facilities. And I think the point is those are expensive, and right now, the cost of debt is at an all-time low. So do you hang on to that bond knowing that you may never see that interest rate again, or Yeah, in all of this, how are we gonna be able to balance the budget at the same time, do the things we're gonna
Well,
need to do for the rest of the
I don't
facilities?
think you-
Because I don't think you can do both.
Unless the revenue surprise, right, in the next few years. And there is mounting pressure in the community. I hear it all the time. We all do. About spending more on facilities relative to our competitors.
Right.
But if those revenue numbers don't change, if we're only a half a mil of
right.
normal
That's the issue.
appreciation, right? If those numbers are what they are and all the other numbers are spot on, we're gonna have shortfalls already. So if you
right.
think that we have to invest money in the facilities, and I happen to think that we do, not everybody agrees. There's no free lunch.
Well,
There's no
and-
free,
and
but I don't think you
here's-
can ask the community to pay for that unless you have a plan. Unless you show them, listen, I know that, this is something that we have to invest
Right.
in for the future, but you have to show them, it can't be just a black box,
Yeah,
right?
and what I would say is, one way to do that, right, and I would say that the best way to do that is to say that running strictly the yearly operational cost of the district is insufficient, because we know we have many buildings and many facilities, and we should every year run a surplus, as we have, to recognize that there are regular costs that occur to maintain the facilities over and above the strict operational. And then we would budget every year a real contribution of $2 million, whatever that number is.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Optimally, you would
And
budget
put
that in.
But that requires taxes,
Correct.
right? And then
Eventually.
each year, or
Or a
Very
reassessment
soon.
at the county
Very
and
soon.
significant growth.
Right.
Another thing that could happen is this reassessment happens in 2 years. And that's not going to change our income in year one, but it could dramatically affect the 10, 15-year projections for the school
and
district.
again, that could be, there's a lot of different things that
Sure.
could happen, right? But the idea is that if we really wanted to say, we need to upgrade our facilities, and we're not talking building a building. We're talking major maintenance is really what we're saying here,
Yes.
right?
That's
We
right.
should have a budgeted number for major maintenance that is real and that goes into the account every year, right? That addresses each of the issues that we're saying, because we know over time, X dollars are required, some years more, some years less, but on average, this is what we should be budgeting every year.
And I think
We're not
that-
doing that.
And yeah, I think that's right. But I also think that's part of the reason that we talked like the last meeting about trying to have another facilities report, because that's exactly what we really do need to do. But we can't do that if we don't know exactly where we are in some of these projects. And I think the administration has done a great job on a lot of these things. I think truly, we've
Right. And again,
pulled money out of the budget to do repairs that have been great.
Right.
But I think going forward, we need to be able to tie down again those costs and things, numbers, to make sure that we do have that covered, because as these issues come up and build, and as we have new board members and so on, I think we need to be able to say, here's what it is, here's how we need to address it, and here's why we can't build a new building to,
Well, right,
You know,
I'm off
and
that.
so on.
And again, I was off this, right? I was off this, I was out,
I
right?
was it.
yeah,
I
so
know.
I think,
I'm
I personally, I appreciate your comments very much. I think
Right,
it's
and
been
what I
a
would
very
tell
good
you is,
discussion.
one of the reasons that our debt profile is as it is, that we could even have this conversation.
Yeah.
Is that for 15 years,
Yep.
we have managed our debt,
Yes.
both with respect to refunding
Right.
and defeasing.
Yep.
So our debt profile now is such that we have flexibility to have this conversation. And
Yes,
that has worked well for us.
that's
right?
exactly
And that's
right.
a great place to be in.
And my concern is that those practices, right, while not the absolute best practice and the only way to do it, has served all of us well.
Yes.
And while I would have no concern about the people here in this room managing things properly, right? Some of the things that we're hearing echo of other places who don't understand the issues as much
Exactly.
and end up setting down a road that they don't want to go down. We know, everybody
Exactly
here knows
right.
exactly what we're talking about, right? But there are places and echoes of this conversation that are worrying with respect to what I've seen happen in other places.
Exactly.
I'm off it now, I'm done, right?
Could I just underscore one thing that you said that I completely agree with, that I don't know if we really, all understand completely, is that if there may or there may not be a number out there that this board thinks we should spend on our facilities today to improve them, because
Are you talking
people
about
differ.
this paper?
That paper, but I have things that are not on that paper in my mind, and I'm sure other board members do too.
Those were
But-
just pulled, those were pulled out of the 2017 facility.
So, and there's new
Which
things,
is
there's,
4 years out of date.
and I'm not here to debate that. Whatever that number is, maybe that number's zero, maybe there's no support for it. But if there were support for something, that paper, maybe more, maybe not, that's a number. There's, experts that can tell us what that number is and how long it would take. That's not the number you're talking about. What the number you're talking about, which is absolutely correct and how every organization should operate, is that when you have your budget every year, you should build in a surplus that is going to go to the long-term capital, not just repairs and maintenance, but the long-term, when, roof is going to go bad every 40 or 50 years. And so if you don't build that into that surplus, but those are two separate numbers. There's a number that maybe we want to spend as a school district to improve our facilities, period. But then there's a number that should be in the budget every year, which is what you were getting at.
Right, and to that point, unrelated to the defeasance, we are very actively trying to find requests for proposals, both for current feasibility studies, including the question of kindergarten. So Mr. Mirabelli has been putting it out to the business officials. I've sent out to some select places. I've actually had some calls. So we're not ready to give you that yet, but we are actively working on it. Because I do think that while these numbers are valuable, there's some refreshing that has to be done.
Absolutely right. That's absolutely right.
These are a little dusty.
Yeah.
And again, that's not a critic, that's just.
No.
Oh, I know, well, that's.
No,
what
that's-
we
But
just
I
wanted
think
to
the whole
get it
idea
outlined.
is to get the issue on the table now and make sure people understand these are real numbers.
Yeah.
And hopefully give us the time to do a facility study so that we're not trying to do a facility study while we're trying to make a
And we
decision
know
on a
things we
bond.
have to do with respect to, we're busy enough. We have enough to get us to whatever,
Yeah.
however long it takes to get to that study. Assuming that the commodity prices, the labor prices come back to.
Normal, somewhat normal,
back to semi-normal.
somewhat.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have our student representatives hanging in there.
Do we do. So Sydney, you ready? Here we go.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
loud and clear.
Awesome. Could you unmute Megan first? She's gonna be the first speaker.
Okay. Megan, are you with us?
Hi, yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Perfect, yes.
So hi everyone. So to start, for spring sports as they wrap up, the boys tennis were District 2 AAA team champions. Sam Weiss and Sam Christman were District 2 AAA doubles champions, and they will both move on to states. For girls track, they won the Jordan relays, and they were also Lackawanna League team champions. And for boys track, yesterday at the district championship, Tyler Petty won first place in the 800 meter and will advance to states next week. Boys volleyball were also Lackawanna League champions. Baseball will begin their district tournament next week. Softball were also Lackawanna League champions, and they will begin their district tournament next weekend. And the girls lacrosse will also begin the district tournament next week. For mock trial, they competed in the national tournament this past weekend. They finished 24th in the nation with a 2-2 record and scored the 5th most points in the tournament. And lastly, for the musical, it is Disney's Freaky Friday, which will be performed on June 4th, 5th, and 6th, with live shows on the 5th and the 6th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. I'd like to continue our presentation with some more exciting end of the year activities that our students truly deserve after the difficult year that they have dealt with. The art department is putting together a virtual art show to showcase their students' work and will be releasing it at the end of the month. High school students are also planning a diversity week to be held June 1st through the 4th with a diversity fair that will be taking place on the 4th during lunch periods. I'd also like to mention the plentiful activities that the school has arranged for the Abington Heights senior class. There will be a virtual presentation to award seniors of reflections and local scholarships on May 25th, which we're very grateful for. The last day of classes for seniors is on June 4th, so during that last week of school, we will be participating in activities such as Senior Recognition Day on June 7th and graduation practices on the 8th, 9th, and 10th. The National Honor Society will also be holding a senior recognition ceremony after school on June 8th to present cords, receive certificates, and light the candles. We will end our school year with a senior award presentation on Friday, June 11th, and finally graduation that will be held at 5:30 at the pit. As I will be graduating from the district in less than a month, I have a few final thoughts I would like to share with the school board and anyone who is listening to the meeting tonight. This year has been a difficult year for everyone, not just the seniors. I have 2 younger siblings in the middle school who have struggled with this year as much as I have. Our parents have put a tremendous amount of effort into making this year as safe and worthwhile as possible, not to mention the changes they've had to make to accommodate virtual, hybrid, and in-person schedules. I'd like to thank my family for the tremendous support throughout the school year, and I couldn't have done it without them. And while we're on thank yous, I might as well bring up the incredible teachers. I often praise their work at these board meetings as I feel that it is important that the board knows how much the students at Abington Heights appreciate their work and dedication. I'm thankful for the opportunities that this district has provided me through the years that I have been a student at Abington Heights, and I can confidently say that my time in the district has prepared me for the future I wish to live out. I will truly miss the faculty and staff of the district, as well as the great friendships I have made along the way. I know I am leaving the students in good hands, as Megan is a talented leader and will successfully represent her class at these meetings, just as I have these past 2 years. I thank you for listening tonight, and I am honored to have worked with each and every one of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good job, Sydney. Great job. I know.
Thank you,
Great job.
Sydney.
Cindy, how about a word or two about your plans and how fortunate Penn State is?
Sure. So I'm going to be studying computer science at Penn State main campus next year. And I will also be a member of the Schreier Honors College at Penn State.
Congratulations.
Cindy.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but am I correct in understanding Google is after you already?
That's correct. I'm also doing a summer program with Google. It's going to be virtual, and it's going to be every day for about a month. And we're going to be working on projects and doing lesson plans and stuff with the Googlers.
Very good. Cindy, thank you so much.
Thank you. Enjoy the night.
Okay.
Dr. Mann, real quick, the diversity program at the high school, can you elaborate a little bit on that? What are they going to be doing?
The diversity program?
Isn't that what you said?
Yes. Well, I know that Mr. Snyder has made some really great efforts. We have, Dr. Vitale is also very much involved with this. And we have been, I think our focus has been on trying to hear student voices, right? How to understand better. It's a very complicated, challenging issue for a public school district, but we feel that the very, very best we can do is listen to the voices of our kids. We've had some clips made of students talking about real concerns that they have had in our buildings. I think we've been somewhat responsive, but need to be more so in what it is we're doing. And you know, that's again the thumbnail sketch, but the true credit goes to Mr. Snyder for his efforts. But do you care to offer any thoughts, Mr. Snyder, or any of our principals? But I know this is a topic for all of us.
In terms of the diversity week and specifically the diversity fair that we're looking to put on, that is currently being run by our students who brought a lot of concerns forward to administration, and we are working to help better educate our students about microaggressions and social norms and understanding people of different cultures and backgrounds and religions and beliefs within our school. And what we're currently working on is a week-long of presentations that our teachers can add into their classrooms and that they can build teachable moments from. So our student groups are currently out looking
and researching and creating videos that will go to the teachers so that they can build lessons around them. And they will be shown during the week leading up to Friday, June 4th. And then on the 4th, we've reached out to any student who wishes to volunteer to have a booth, and we're going to do it outside during our lunches, weather permitting, and allow students to go out and speak to their peers and learn about their culture, their backgrounds, and truly understand the great amount of diversity that we do have in our school.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for that.
Great. Okay, at this time, we would have public participation. Any public out there? Anybody here who would like to address the board? No? Okay, we can move on to our action discussion items.
So, Ms. Pachowski, we request, I'm sorry, we do the bills?
Yes, request the board to approve the bills. Motion
So moved.
Second.
on the question? Roll call?
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson,
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Mrs. Bashalski.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
And Mr. Mirabelli, can you give the treasurer's report?
Certainly. We started the month of April with 20,981,000 in the account. Took in local revenues of 338,000, state revenues of 941,000, federal revenues of 133,000, for total monthly revenues of 1,413,000. Total cash available was 22,394,000. Net disbursements of 4,947,000 for a final cash balance of 17,447,274.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve
So moved.
Second.
on the question? Roll call?
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mrs. Bashalski.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
And Dr. May, the personnel report.
Yes, under resignations, we request the board to approve those individuals listed, 3 very, very talented educators, but I want to particularly call the board's attention to Dr. Amy Thomas, who happens to be joining us tonight. I don't recall where it is she's heading to, but that's inconsequential anyway. The consequential thing is that she has been an extraordinary colleague, an extraordinary educator, an extraordinary leader in our district. We will forever be a better place because of her time here. And I do want to thank you, Dr. Thomas, and wherever it is you're going.
To all of you, I know I'm back here and I'm by myself, but thank you to all of you, because I'm a better educator for the time I've spent here and as part of this community. And I'm so grateful that you took a chance on me 7 years ago, having no experience as an administrator. And I've learned so much during my time here. And thanks to my colleagues behind me for always being so supportive as well. I've learned more than I can say. So thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
I have a motion to approve the resignation, sorry, where this we're at, we didn't do a motion yet, did we?
I don't think so.
No, okay,
So moved.
Second.
on the question? Roll call?
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Bashalski.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
And under resignations, non-certificated, a long time and very great maintenance person, Mr. Yerke, we request the board to approve that resignation.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mrs. Bashalski.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
And we request the board to approve Henry Chang of Scranton as a long-term substitute in German for the 2021-2022 school year.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming.
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney.
Yes.
Mr. Acker.
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
And under leave of absence, request the board to approve the individual listed under letter A in number 4.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Fleming.
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney.
Yes.
Mr. Acker.
Yes.
Mr. Azar.
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
And we request the board to approve the EDR positions as listed under number 5, letters A through D.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney.
Yes.
Mr. Acker.
Yes.
Mr. Azar.
Yes.
Mr. Fleming.
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
And while no board action is necessary, we do want to acknowledge Melissa Namaka. Mrs. Namaka is achieving tenure. And so congratulations to her on that achievement. Under letter D, request the board to approve the 2021-2022 dual enrollment agreement with Lackawanna College as contained in item number 1.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mrs. Tierney.
Yes.
Mr. Acker.
Yes.
Mr. Azar.
Yes.
Mr. Fleming.
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
And consider a motion to approve the agreement between Abington Heights School District and Northeast Behavioral Healthcare Consortium as contained in item number 2.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Acker.
Yes.
Mr. Azar.
Yes.
Mr. Fleming.
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney.
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
And we consider a motion to approve the disposal of several assets, including a sewing machine, printer, a mimeograph, and related items.
So moved.
Second.
On the question?
How long has the mimeograph been?
Well, that's- next month, we're doing the quill pens and ink wells, Mr. Olson. So, long time.
Roll call?
Mr. Azar.
Yes.
Mr. Fleming.
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney.
Yes.
Mr. Acker.
Yes.
Motion, Mrs. Pashowski. Motion carries 6-0.
And we request the board to approve the agreement with Children's Service Center of Wyoming as contained in item number 3.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Fleming.
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney.
Yes.
Mr. Acker.
Yes.
Mr. Azar.
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
And we ask the board to consider a motion to approve the food service management contract with Metz Culinary Management for the 2021-2022 school year as contained in item number 4.
So moved.
Second.
On the question?
Is this contract, any changes on this contract this year?
So the contract is a year-to-year contract. We're in a bit of a unique situation where due to the pandemic, we're able to extend it past the 5 years. So the notable change is actually they were not able to guarantee us a positive profit last year because of all the uncertainty. And they are guaranteeing a $20,000 profit in this contract. So
Okay.
that's positive news. So we look forward to, working with them again. And
Great.
we're
Thank you.
satisfied with the service.
Roll call?
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney.
Yes.
Mr. Acker.
Yes.
Mr. Azar.
Yes.
Mr. Fleming.
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
And we would consider a motion to approve the 2021-2022 Abington Heights School District preliminary tentative budget as contained in item number 5.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mrs. Tierney.
Yes.
Mr. Acker.
Yes.
Mr. Azar.
Yes.
Mr. Fleming.
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
And we consider a motion to make the alterations to the Abington Heights School District Health and Safety Plan as noted in item number 6.
So moved.
Second.
Question? Roll call?
Mr. Acker.
Yes.
Mr. Azar.
Yes.
Mr. Fleming.
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney.
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
And consider a motion to approve the first reading of the 2021-2022 Abington Heights School District calendar as contained in item number 7.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson,
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
And we would consider a motion to approve the Abington Heights School District 2021 summer school teachers as contained in item number 8.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? Roll call?
Mr. Fleming,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney,
Yes.
Mr. Acker,
Yes.
Mr. Azar,
Yes.
Mrs. Pashowski.
Yes.
Motion carries
I
6-0.
should note, we're very grateful to these individuals. It's been a long and exhausting year for our teachers. And the fact that they're willing to come in and continue this work over the summer for students who need it, we're very, very grateful for the willingness to do so.
That's great.
Rest of the items are informational. Is there any new business?
I have some new business. Mrs. O'Day, will you come back up? My new business is Mrs. O'Day is the grandmother of twins.
Twin girls, and one's name is Andy Snyder. Her last name is Snyder.
All right,
That's great.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Mrs. Tierney.
Yep,
Yes,
yep. Well, I happened to be on the trails and Mrs. O'Day happened to show me a beautiful picture of those beautiful girls.
Old business?
I do have small business. Can we think about lacrosse? Can we think about putting lacrosse on for next spring as a Abington Heights part of the program? Can we look to possibly have conversation on that in the future? So maybe in the summer, we can have conversation on that, so we can have a direction for lacrosse. Lacrosse, 5 years ago, started and we actually allowed it to happen, but I believe it's more of a pay to a club. And I don't know if any of you've noticed, but the numbers are fabulous. The competition is great. They're doing an incredible job. I think one of our student representatives just said that they're starting their districts. So if we could have conversation maybe in the summer, I'm looking in a direction for it.
Yeah, I would definitely support it. There's a very large number, I think we mentioned at the last meeting, of younger athletes participating in lacrosse in the Abingtons. It's only a 1.5-year old program and there are dozens and dozens of kids playing it. So I think it's going to be
Yes.
a
And
very
you know,
popular
the
sport.
biggest part of that is to have the district hire the coach, the leader. And that's, I think, the most important part of these programs. You know, the leader makes the program. So if we could just maybe have a conversation with someone that I'd really like to see that. Thanks.
I had one thing I wanted to bring up. So I've heard from a lot of parents and coaches in the youth soccer program. And there's a lot of people that are asking me if the board would consider splitting the co-ed junior high team into a boys team and a girls team. And I know that this year in particular, there's a large number of girls coming up into the junior high program. Junior high soccer is co-ed.
There was one.
It's always been co-ed though.
Yeah.
Junior high,
Yeah.
at the junior high level
Yes, there's always.
with one.
So no,
coach.
I'm saying there's a lot of people that are asking for a separate girls and separate boys
Oh.
team for junior high.
It would be
so-
nice to get some information on it.
Yeah, I'd love to, hear more about, I don't know the history of why it's co-ed. I think that there's positives to it, for sure, but I know that at least from a lot of the parents that I've been talking to, that there's probably an intimidation factor for some of the girls, the ones that might not be able to compete at that level. So I know at least I've been told in the past, there's been a question about the numbers. Are there enough girls to merit having a separate team? And I think that if you're one of the top girls in junior high, I mean, I've watched a lot of youth soccer. The girls are a lot of times better than the boys at that age. But I think that you would have a lot more interest in the program. And given
What's
the numbers,
competition? What are other, are we the only co-ed district or school like?
that's one of the things I'd love to, I don't know. I think there's a mix, but I'd love to find out more
Right.
about like what schools have co-ed, what schools don't, and where do we fit in? So not something to obviously, vote on. I just like to gather more. But if it's going to happen this year, it is a fall sport. So it's not something that lacrosse I fully support also. I think that that's very important. That's a spring sport for both of those boys and girls. But this would, if we're going to do it this year, I think it would be something we'd have to do sometime relatively soon, if there was support for it.
Motion to adjourn?
Oh, I did want to ask what we also talked when we first got in. Has there been any discussions, Dr. Mayen, about, obviously the CDC has changed their guidelines on mask wearing indoors and outdoors. Have there been any discussions about giving people the option to not wear masks, teachers the option to not wear masks if they're fully vaccinated, or administrators or anybody else in the school?
Yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot, actually. And I think certainly the first discussion is a much more easy one when kids are outside. Right? And so I think that's a fair one. But the concern about being indoors, right? Number one, I do not think we should be in the business of tracking individuals, whether they're vaccinated or not. And that is true, I think, of both our employees and of our students. Right? We know that a very substantial number of our students will not be vaccinated, at least given the age level in the near future, acknowledging that the COVID is very different in younger kids than it is in older students, albeit very dangerous for students who are medically at risk. Right? The major concern or pause that I have in recommending that we relax our indoor mask wearing in the classroom, right, is the study that we have cited a number of times that encouraged us to go to modified quarantine, and that is the MIT study. And actually, it is posted on our website in our COVID section if anyone wants to take a glance at it. But the MIT study speaks about cumulative exposure time. Right? It's not the 6 feet, 15 minutes thing, but it revolves around levels of respiration, ventilation, and mask wearing. Right? And as this was mentioned before, I looked up one of the relevant statements in that study. Right? And if I may, I'll read it because this is important. And I'm interested in people's thoughts, but this is what's preventing me from being on board with the masks. Right? So it says, and again, this is taken out of context of the whole study, which people can see. It says the importance of adequate ventilation and mask use is made clear by our guideline. For normal occupancy and without masks, the safe time after an infected individual enters the classroom is 1.2 hours for natural ventilation and 7.2 hours with mechanical ventilation, according to the transient bound in their calculations. It says even with cloth masks with a permeability of 0.3 as they measured it, these bounds are increased dramatically to 8 hours and 80 hours respectively, which is to say the cumulative exposure time before someone would be at risk in the presence of a person with COVID in the room. So this particular study, and it is just one study, right, emphasizes the importance of ventilation, low-level respiration, and significantly mask wearing in the context of the classroom. And as we have cited this study, as I have cited this study with respect to allowing us to have confidence that COVID is not transmitting in the building, it's very hard for me to go off some of the core recommendations it has with the efficacy of masks in those circumstances. So I'm not saying I'm an epidemiologist, I have any great insight, but that's a perspective that I hold and would be very interested in someone to talk me out of it, because I recognize even tonight we see that masks have consequences. But we are still also seeing students with COVID cases occurring in our buildings and in our districts, even at this moment. So that's my only thought that I have to offer on the topic for today.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything pressing to do with only a few weeks left in the school year. What are your thoughts about outdoor activities, though, not indoor activities?
Yeah, this thing kind of dropped on us fast, right? And so I think, and I've really tried to look at as best I can and read as much as I can before I make a recommendation. So my sense is I'm good with people on the playground playing, right? And we moved in that direction tonight.
Yeah.
I'm good with people sharing materials now because we're reading so much that it really is not something that's spread on surface to surface, right? If I had to do it again, we wouldn't buy the aerostatic sprayers because I think that really didn't help us much, but we didn't know that at the time, right? But still, the whole idea of transmission in air inside. That still worries me. And so we'll move, I think, more and more to have fewer and fewer restrictions. I think we made a good step tonight. I think we'll make better steps, more steps in the future. But we have been cautious through this whole time. And again, I'm just offering my perspective with no great insight or no great training other than what I read.
So my thought on it is because at the time we didn't know the efficacy of vaccines, and they've proven, I think, undeniably that they're extremely effective. And there's been plenty of opportunity for people, I believe, 12 and above, to receive a vaccine if they wanted. So I don't see, for example, like in this meeting, where there's no one 12 here, to be wearing a mask. It doesn't make sense to me.
I agree.
Well, and I would say nearly all of our professional staff are vaccinated. All of our professional staff are wearing masks because we have certain expectations for these reasons in our buildings that students wear masks. And the idea, and again, because we don't track the issue of who has and who has not been vaccinated, right? We do ask our people to wear their mask indoors for good reason. And my only suggestion in our wearing masks tonight is, number one, it's called for in our emergency plan. So we have to follow that unless the board changes it, which it could. And my other sense is that since our staff members who are vaccinated are wearing their masks for good reason within the building, I will just continue to wear my mask, even though I am fully vaccinated and I have no concern about getting anyone sick, and I have no concern myself of getting sick. I will do it because that is what we're asking others in our buildings to do with I think, good reason, particularly in light of the fact that we do a medically fragile children. So I'm not saying that's a good answer, but that's where I'm suggesting we wear masks, and if we don't want to wear them, we have to change the policy.
Yeah, so I think we should look at it, because it seems to me that, especially with vaccines, wearing a mask, is it turning into something of more of a social nature as opposed to a health nature? And that's one of the concerns I have. So if it is very effective, I don't see why anybody who's vaccinated and believes that it's effective needs to wear a mask anywhere. With the exception of course, healthcare settings, where there's serious things going on. And I think the CDC laid it out. I mean, there's, where to wear a mask and where not to wear a mask. And I take this meeting as an example. We're all distanced and we're wearing masks, but if you're vaccinated, it's not necessary. A mask doesn't do anything.
Well, and our one of the things that we've read is that when we make that decision, if we were to make it tomorrow, right, then we will not be wearing it, because mask then is voluntary, right? And there's been ample pushback and ample thought on the CDC guidance. Their major criticism is that a voluntary mask mandate is no mandate at all, and there is now masks have been abandoned. And so if we were to make that only vaccinated people, and we don't track who is vaccinated, then we run a very, very high risk of losing what we're told, at least, are substantial benefits of mask wearing by large groups of people in our buildings. And so the core criticism of, and again, I'm not saying that transmission is occurring with vaccinated people. I'm saying that we don't know how many students are vaccinated. We think a lot, but we know that there are a lot aren't. And to the extent that we employ that thought, then we've eliminated, in essence, mask wearing in our buildings.
Yes. So, and it's easy for me to cherry pick this meeting, right?
Right.
But if it, in the situation of if someone's vaccinated and everyone else is not, you still shouldn't have to wear a mask.
Okay, we have a 9 o'clock call with John Alley, so. Oh, you don't?
And that's
So-
it's a board decision. but
Yeah,
I'm
I know.
saying,
I think we should have a
if-
discussion
if-
about
If
it.
we
I
don't
am
wear
very,
masks
I am very
here,
comfortable in supporting Dr. May and setting an
Yeah.
example with everyone else
Exactly.
until we make the change. And until we make a change, I'm very comfortable with wearing my mask and setting the example for us as adults to support our decisions that we made. So.
I think it should be open for discussion.
oh, sure. I'm thinking about it constantly, really. And anyone who has thoughts who wants to. It's problematic. The whole thing is truly problematic.
It is.
It's been from the beginning, and we don't get a lot of help with clear guidance.
The CDC didn't even tell the Department of Health in Pennsylvania that they were doing it. So, I mean, this
Right.
came fast.
Right.
So I agree with you that we should be doing this in phases, but I agree with Phil, like we should be talking about it a lot because, anything we can do to get back to normalcy for these kids.
Well, I
is
made
a
everything
big
a
benefit.
slideshow because mine are just not good anymore compared to what we're seeing. We'll continue this conversation every time. And the only consolation is those who want us, we did something tonight. Right? We moved
Absolutely.
positively tonight.
Yep.
And let's continue this conversation. It's a very important one.
Okay. So, Phil, you don't want to,
I do it. I'm in school.
oh, okay. Okay,
But thank you for coming.
All right.
Thank you for coming.
okay, all right. Good night, everyone. That's so
Thank you.
walking.
Oh, Amy, bye.
Thank you all. Yeah, goodbye. Goodbye. We say goodbye. Goodbye. Let's get off the thing.
Okay.